As a lover of retro games and occasional Nihon Falcon fan, I took the time to replay through I II and II for the sake of this review. Needless to say, I wouldn't be replaying them if I didn't enjoy playing them in the first place, so of course this is a positive review, but the games have a bunch of issues that I feel should be highlighted to anyone considering purchasing them. I and II were among some of the first action RPGs ever made, first released in 1987 and 1988 to reach our acclaim, remade for Windows PCs in 2001, ported to the PSP in 2009, and then ported back to Windows in 2013 as I and II Chronicles Plus. This quick history lesson is important to illustrate just what we are dealing with here. This is a 13-year-old part of a remake of a classic from the 80s with all the accumulated baggage, positive and negative, that you would expect. For example, it doesn't recognize your controller unless you've connected it to your PC before launching the game, boss battles break at frame rates over 60, the animated cutscenes are heavily compressed and full of artifacts, the sprites have this terrible detailed look to them, and your choices of anti-aliasing are either no or Vaseline smear. Also, while it does have a widescreen mode, that was added as part of the PSP port, and instead of increasing your field of view, it further constrains it by zooming in to make the game more easily viewable on handheld displays, so unless you're playing on a Steam Deck or something, chances are you'll be stuck to a 4:3 aspect ratio. Luckily, most of these issues can be easily sidestepped as long as you are aware of them, by locking your frame rate to 60, or remembering to turn on your controller before pressing play, and most important of all, using a CRT style shader to get an approximation of what the developers intended the game to look like back in 2001. It's not something I can really show in this video because it doesn't play nice with YouTube's compression algorithm, but you can easily try it for yourself by applying shader glass to this video. For those who don't feel like doing it, here's a few screenshots for comparison. As you can see, the dithering and aliasing is very nicely hidden by the shader, and so are the compression artifacts. Of course, there's a heavy dose of subjectivity here, but I fully recommend you at least try it if the graphics don't look very good to you. Being so deeply rooted to the past comes with its own set of advantages, however, in the form of gameplay and design decisions that you don't really see nowadays, like the bump combat system that, in an ironic twist of fate, feels new and different precisely because they have been abandoned by modern game designers. Bump combat is exactly what it sounds like. Rather than pressing a button to swing your sword, you deal damage by bumping into your enemies and receive damage when they bump into you. Most of the gameplay consists of maneuvering to avoid tackling your enemies head-on, getting surrounded, or hit by their projectiles. Over the course of the game, you unlock a ranged attack of your own, but at its core, it's bump combat all the way. Like I said, it makes for a very refreshing, hectic gameplay style where your reflexes and pattern recognition abilities are constantly tested, and battles can quickly turn against you if you make a mistake. That's not to say the game is unforgiving though. There are a bunch of difficulty options to choose from, and you can save basically anytime you want, so you never have to worry about losing a bunch of progress to an encounter gone bad. My only issue with it from a modern point of view is that you cannot change the difficulty after starting out. If you feel like the game's too easy or too hard, your choices are to either put up with it or start over from the beginning, so keep that in mind. In I and II, you play as Adolf Risting, an adventurer who washes ashore on the island of Esteria after having his boat sunk by the mysterious storm wall that has completely cut Esteria off from the rest of the world right as monsters started appearing. During the story, Adolf explores the island, discovering clues to the storm wall's origins, the island's past, and the ancient civilization of Is. It's a somewhat straightforward story, but it already features Nihon Falcon's signature style of adding detail to the world by having NPC dialogue change constantly as you progress along the plot. I'll talk more about it in the spoiler chapter, but for now, I'll limit myself to saying there's this great mixture of dark, somber and wistful moments, with a few funny scenes and a slight sword and sorcery bent that I really enjoyed. Now, being a couple of old games, I and II are rather short and feature a small amount of maps to explore, to the point you can easily finish both games in a day if you know what you're doing, and a weekend if you don't, or if you enjoy immersing yourself on the world. And if you're anything like me, you certainly will. There's a lot of little details scattered throughout the game, from secret interactions to impressive vistas. Ys is very good at creating a sense of large scale despite the small maps, and it feels really good when you're on top of a high place and recognize the different villages and dungeons off in the background. There are no quest markers to guide you, but the NPC dialogue is pretty good at pointing the way forward, most of the time anyway. There are a couple of situations where you are expected to go through some dialogue scenes in order, but you need to leave town and on back for the NPC stage to update in between them, which can leave you feeling stuck if you don't know that's how the game logic works. Other than that, you should be fine as long as you talk to people, pay special attention to any text highlighted in blue, and don't forget to experiment a little bit with the different items you find in your adventures. Music is always a highlight for Nihon Falcon games, and Chronicles Plus features 3 full soundtracks for you to play around with: the original PC-88 version, along with 2 more modern rearrangements. There are also 2 graphical options, Complete and Chronicles, but the differences between them are a lot less noticeable, mostly governing the character artwork shown during some dialogue scenes. This next section will contain spoilers, as I wanna talk in a bit more detail about the story, so if you'd rather experience it for yourself, feel free to skip to the next chapter where I'll conclude with a few closing remarks. The story of Ys 1 and 2 is about magic being a powerful tool that, while certainly useful, comes from a corrupted source that constantly threatens to destroy all that their users have built. The more you use it, the more its evil influence leaks out in the form of demons, and using magic to fight them leads to a vicious cycle where the more magic you use, the more demons appear, forcing you to use even more magic. Fantasy RPGs very rarely treat magic as something both mysterious and dangerous, forever out of the player's reach. Most games are all too eager to just give us ready access to a bunch of spells and let us go crazy with them, so this approach of having adults spend most of the story as a lone swordsman with very limited access to low-powered magical artifacts while going against powerful sorcerers reminded me of old sword and sorcery stories, you know, like Conan the Barbarian. Ado may not have Arnold Schwarzenegger's physique, but the entire setup of the descendants of the Six Priests inheriting a small sliver of their powers, manifesting them in subtle ways, rare artifacts being passed down through generations or hidden in ancient ruins, waiting for the appointed time where they'll once again be needed, and the flying city of Ys looming inscrutable in the background is perfect. Even the way the enemy sorcerers act is great. They may be powerful in comparison to their contemporaries, but they clearly hold only a fraction of their own knowledge of their ancestors and often resort to mundane means instead. Meanwhile, the twin goddesses, as the only living remnants of the ancient civilization of Ys, hold all their immeasurable power and knowledge, but are just as limited in their ability to actually use them due to the risk of strengthening their enemies. This to me is the best way to write magic in a fantasy world, as reality-bending feats only a select few can even dream of achieving after an inordinate amount of effort and at great personal risk. And to have it all crashing down at the hands of some guy with a sword is just great. Anyway, with that slight rant over, let me just conclude by saying I love Ys 1 and 2. It has that simple, almost arcade style of gameplay, with somewhat straightforward characters and story built upon deep lore, a low fantasy tone that I think is perfect, and a soundtrack that is among some of the best I've ever heard. It is rather short and slightly marred by its age in the form of technical issues and graphics that don't translate well into this era of sharp LED screens, but considering how easy it is to get around these issues, the low base price of $15 which get deeply discounted rather often, and the massive influence Nihon Falcon in general and the Ys series in particular had on the action RPG genre during its infancy, I believe this is a game every RPG fan should try. Also, if you enjoyed then, consider moving on to Ys Origin afterwards. It's a prequel showing the events of 700 years before, when Ys took flight and magic was first sealed away. It shows everyone at the peak of their powers and helps further drive home the sword and sorcery tone of the first two games. Anyway, that's enough from me for today. This was a video review of Ys I and II Chronicles Plus, available on Steam and GOG. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, appreciate your feedback. Bye bye!